Hey everyone, and welcome to my Procreate 4 demo for the piece I call Yoga. So, as you can see, this is Dulcim from Street Fighter, one of my favorite games, one of my favorite game series, and I love Dulcim as a character. You can see the illustration didn't start that way. I started by roughing in whoever this dude was going to be, and really this was just one of those things where I'd done a bunch of pieces, I'd done a lot of art at work, and then it was like, okay, I want to do something that's just really simple, so I wanted to mess around with some stuff and keep it kind of just fun, and it ended up becoming Dulcim. So I sort of fell ass backwards into Dulcim, but you know, that's not really a bad thing. So here I am using the fat pencil at a thicker size than I usually do, and that sort of, I don't know, inspired me to just keep it like that and sort of be a little bit looser with it and not get too precise with the lines. And that's sort of how we got to this look. Once the lines were sort of going this direction, I decided, well, let's keep the colors that way too. And really, actually, before I even got to the colors, I was just going to keep this whole thing grayscale. So I wanted to really try to mimic what it might look like if it was a real material, meaning real pencil, real paper, etc. So you'll see I do some sort of little gimmicky tricks in here, but it sort of creates a fun little thing. So at this point, there's really nothing to say. It's straight up just a drawing of Dulcim, and I'm using the pencil, and I'm just drawing it. There's literally no tricks here. I'm just drawing with it slightly larger than I normally do. But we're about to get into a trick because I decide, well, I want to add some sort of dimension to him. So how are we going to do that? And I started screwing around in the brushes, trying to find something that would maybe just be different than what I usually did. So you can see here I find that blotchy brush. It sort of got thrown down super fast and then it disappeared. It's in the calligraphy section, which I'll show you in a minute. And then you see here, I go in and block it in really solidly, very quickly still, but really solidly, but I want that blotchy look. So that's what you got right there. So you can see it got really blotchy. It's not solid anymore. So let's talk about exactly how that happened. We're going to repeat that section. Here I just use my usual flat solid brush and I block in exactly where I want the shadows to be. Now this is really clean. It's not perfect, meaning I'm not putting the shadows in all the right places, but it's really clean from an edge finish perspective. Then I decide to use that as my selection, and then I use the blotchy brush in the calligraphy section of the Procreate brushes to blotch in these shadows, which we'll see in a second here. Right there, it switches to it, and then you see like a little bit of erasing happening around the edges, and then we duplicate and we do like another sort of like skin pass just to darken the entire figure right there, and then I erase away around it, and that's how we get sort of the basic look of Dulcim for this. So let's actually go like a little deeper into that blotchy look. So here I'm just going to take the hard airbrush set to some sort of a gray, and we're going to blotch it into some just nondescript shape, but something specific enough so that you can at least follow along with what's happening here. So just again, noodling some really weird, somehow creepy shape. Now we create a new layer, and let's go into the calligraphy section of the brushes. I always think it's in painting, and then I realize that it's in calligraphy. So let's go to calligraphy right there, blotchy. So it's supposed to be like a wet, blotchy pen. That's what it's trying to replicate. And you can see it's got a lot of that stroke correction on it, so it can be a little hard to use, but you can always turn that off. I was just in a hurry, so I said, screw it. But I think it's got a really cool look to it. So I'm probably going to try and use it more in the future when I have the opportunity. Now, with lots of semi-transparent brushes and wet brushes, you always have one problem with them, which is if you want that core texture that brush provides, you need to apply it all in one stroke. So right there was one stroke, but then here's the second stroke, and you see it gets a lot darker. And the third stroke, it gets even more darker. It's very additive. So that can make it really uneven, which can be a problem depending on what you're going for. So this was the whole reason why I went with this method. I used the selection to be my mask, essentially, and then in one unbroken stroke, I apply the blotchy ink to that spot. So it's got all that cool little damage that this brush has in it, but it's not doing that overly layered thing where it gets really, really dark in spots. The only downside here as you can see that it's still really clean because I used a really clean brush. Now technically you could use a messier brush for your core shape, but then what I just do is I use that blotchy brush as an eraser, and I go in and damage all of those edges so that I can try and get a more natural look. Now with something very spindly like this, that could be really time consuming, but you'll see, we'll go over it one more time, on the Dulcim piece, it's actually quite easy to do because it's a big blocky thing. So here we've got the blockiness of the shadow, and we're using this to control the blotchy brush from a mask perspective. Not only will it allow us to apply it in one big stroke so we don't have that layering that happens, but it'll also make it so that it's a very unruly brush. It won't go in all these crazy places that we don't want it to. So there it is as a simple gray flat. And then we're going to take that and we're going to select it and just do the blotchy brush right over it, which is what that is. And it obviously gets done in one stroke, which is why in the time lapse you just see it pop in. Now if you look along the edges, you can see me on like the skull and stuff erasing away, just trying to get rid of some of those too perfect edges across the whole thing. So that's how I did that. There's a bunch of other tricks that I do in here, but I think I can just explain those instead of having to do a big breakdown of them. His face paint was also done with the splotchy brush, but then now what I'm doing around the edges is I'm using the graphite, the shaded graphite brush, and then the, I think Bonobo or Bonobo or however the fuck it's pronounced, brush to do all this sort of like damage around, which I'm also putting little dots in so that it looks like eraser shavings. And then I took the big airbrush and did a big soft couple of streaks back there, as well as some motion blurring and stuff, and then did the graphite shading over that to make it look like as Xerox and like graphite smudging and all those types of things. So let's look at that one more time. You can see it all right there. And then I'll zoom in a second too so you can see some of the edging that I was talking about. The eyes get put in right there with just a little bit of a rim light, nothing too fancy. And that right there ends it for the pencil segment. This is what it looked like when that part was finished. And then if we zoom in, you can see along the edges some of the little flaky bits that I just added in with the fat pencil, little dablets here and there. And now let's color this. I figured that if I was going to color it, I wanted to keep it as messy and sort of experimental as the rest of it was. So I'm just using a various assortment of brushes. I think the Oriental brush, it's really not that important. I would just recommend trying as many brushes as you can and monkeying around with it. I do this slight purpley shadow thing, but it's all vertical strokes, and then I use a white version of the fat pencil to do the rim light so that it all tries to stay a little natural medium-y. I put this pink in the background, but then quickly took that over to the seafoam for the background. And then there's some little things that happen with the ears there. So here it is again so you can see. And on the ears and the nose, where I normally put sort of like a blush or a little bit of a soft pink or dark red or whatever, I did that here also, but then I also added a little bit of that dotted color halftone, and there's a little bit of that in the shadows as well, you can see on the skulls. So let's actually talk about how I did that using the decimals brush in Procreate. You can see here when you draw it, this is how it comes out. It's set so that the dots are different sizes based on the size of the brush. I have a brush I use in Photoshop where that doesn't happen. You have to actually manipulate the base texture for that. And I do it in the same way that I did it with the blotchy stuff. I use a shape, I select it, and then I fill that in one stroke so that it doesn't layer multiple times, and that's what gets me the pattern. Obviously, if you keep applying it, here's me just adjusting it so you can see. And if you keep applying it, it's going to apply more dots and more spots, which is what you see here, which is what you're trying to avoid if you want it to be completely even across it. So let's just do one last spin on the color version so you can see that all in one fell swoop. Total time on this whole thing was probably 30 minutes of drawing him and doing all of the grayscaling stuff, and then probably 15 minutes of color. It was really quick. I think it shows because it's messy. It's deliberately messy, but it was definitely very fast, and it was really fun because this whole point of doing this was to do something loose and not be too precious about any of the details. So this is the last few seconds of the Dulcim paint, and that's the final version of it. So we have the pencil version right there, the gray version, I guess you could say. And then we have the color version right there. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.